my hope here is to share a little bit about Thoughtexchange, a little bit about the decision-making and leadership process and moving through change. And I think most importantly, my goal is to be able to share what that means in practice, and so that folks can hear from you, Trent. So that's basically the agenda there. And then the other thing I'm hoping to try is that people have an opportunity to jump in and test out Thoughtexchange. So we'll go through that. So before we get to any of that, there's one piece that's really important to know. It was mentioned in my bio. I really believe in building strong relationships, and our company is focused on that. We are committed to bringing people together into meaningful conversations, and meaningful conversations lead to strong relationships. So, what is the question is, how do we get to ownership? How do we get to that strong attachment to a decision? And of course, there's obviously ways that people go about that currently and have done so for a while, just to get to general agreement. So there's a few common ways. One is surveys, and if we were to ask a group of people to, respond to this survey type question, they would read through the list and 1, 2, 3, or 4 find one that they most align with. And of course, there's lots of great spots for polls and for surveys and things like that. There obviously, there's a lot of different ways to do them, and they can be really cost effective. In fact, they can cost nothing at all except for people's time. They can be straightforward, and they can be done in many languages. The challenge, though, if you think about that survey question, is that I'm forcing you into making a decision, and I might actually be creating polarity in a group that didn't already exist. In fact, those are probably, if there was a 5th option on that survey question, all of the above is one that many of us might have chosen. The other thing is that if we're a large group and 40% chose number 2 and 30 in a couple others and 10 in another, all of a sudden I'm manufacturing consent if I move forward with the one that 40% of the people supported, except there's 60% of the people that aren't in alignment with that. So this can get a little bit too simple sometimes, and I realize I'm making that sound even simpler than it is. The other way that folks go about generating conversation and dialogue is having town hall conversations and focus groups, and these can be really effective in generating lots of great dialogue with a few folks. You might have a question like this up there and break out into table groups, have a lot of good conversation. There will be probably paper on each table, and there'll be notes being made and priorities being drawn and sticky dots and post-it notes. And at the end of the day, someone's going to go around and collate all that information. And it can feel really good. It feels really good because it's interactive. You're probably going to see the leaders of that group involved, of that organization involved in those conversations. It's human. Like it's meaningful. We're sitting side by side. We're having a good conversation. There's a good connection being built. And of course, there's no predetermined direction for that conversation. Being a card-carrying extrovert, I can tell you that I'm easily can monopolize one of those conversations. My ideas they're hard to contain. And it makes it hard for people that are not extroverted to share their ideas as well. And also the summarizing piece becomes a challenge. If there's a team that's summarizing the information or an individual, it can take a lot of time and a lot of effort. There's also some bias of the people that are organizing that information into how it gets collated. So again, these are all important means to collect information and to build ownership. But we actually think there's another step that can go beyond that, and that's this idea of creating a meaningful process where voices are heard evenly and where different ideas have an opportunity to become important regardless of who's saying them. Just a quick note on process. We know that whatever the process is, if it's important to involve people in these decisions. This quote comes out of an article Harvard Business Review article, and it's so true. There's some great case studies in there. If you're looking for that, I'm happy to send that around. And we believe that Thoughtexchange fits into that. But I wanted to share the story behind this slide. I want you to imagine for a second that it's Friday afternoon. It's been a really good week. It's been a lot of hard work, really good week though. And you're with 10 of your colleagues or 9 other colleagues, and you're going to go to your local watering hole. And it's a nice sunny day outside, and the waiter or the server comes around and they ask, they'd like you to take your drink order. And so there's 5 or 6 people that, they'll each say, I'd like a beer, and there's probably 2 people that'll say, I'm going to have wine. Another person that's going to have a highball. And then there's this last person that says, I really feel like a margarita today. And they're asking about the flavors of the margarita, and maybe they settle on a strawberry margarita. And as they're asking that question, the rest of us are looking around, looking at each other, saying, that sounds really good. Yeah, I'm going to have a margarita. And I'm going to have a margarita too. And next thing you know, all those drink orders that were issued before are now margarita drink orders. So it's a round of margaritas. And the purpose of telling that story is that we all got to hear each other and hear what different perspectives might have been, and discover that actually we align with something different than what we started with. And our goal in Thoughtexchange is not to change people's perspectives, but to give them the opportunity to find margarita thoughts, to find ideas that they organize around that may or may not be their own, in a way that they're not influenced by other perspectives, by political influence or other standings in the community. And so we do that through software. We do that by asking open-ended questions, allowing people to respond to those questions in their own time and space on anything that's connected to the internet. And then once they've responded, they get to see what other people are saying as well in that same conversation. So they get to prioritize each other's thoughts. That's where this idea of listening to each other order the drinks, and eventually maybe I'm going to reprioritize my thoughts, and I'll prioritize other people's thoughts. And in Discover, that's where we get to find those margarita thoughts and find what are the key things that people really organize around, what are the key interests, and what are the interests that are not supported as well. And so this is where I'm looking forward to hearing Trent's perspectives on how this sort of approach has informed his work in San Juan. And Trent, maybe I'll pass it over to you.
Yeah, sure. Thank you, Matt. As you point out, there's a lot of ways we can collect input in school systems between those surveys, community meetings, and that's a good thing, because the issues we face in education are very complex, and they usually have no right answer. They usually have no wrong answers. The only thing we can guarantee about the solutions we find is that they're not going to make everyone happy. And one of the big frustrations that those of us who are involved in that process of gaining insight and input from our stakeholders, one of those big frustrations we have is we do get to see the different parts of the conversation and get exposed to the different thoughts that are out there. And then we're put in that position of being the ones to have to try and explain it to others and share it with others, so that all sides of the perspective, all sides of the question are seen by everybody, and hopefully they take that into consideration. Unfortunately, it's human nature that we all want to make sure that we're heard, that we want to put our voice out there. We want to make sure that our idea is the one that everybody rallies behind. And a lot of those other processes between surveys and those town halls where you have the extroverts who monopolize the conversation against us poor introverts like myself, those are not necessarily the easiest ways for us to do that. And I think one of the powers in Thoughtexchange, and one of the things I want to highlight in the 2 examples we're going to share, is that it really allows us to move that conversation to the community so that they can directly engage in being exposed to each other's thoughts and feelings. And that, I think, forms a richer conversation and relationship as we look for solutions that fit the problems we're trying to solve. So I want to take you through 2 examples of processes we run in San Juan Unified with Thoughtexchange. We've done 5 large processes to date. And the first one that we ever did was actually on the topic area that many of you are probably starting to deal with now, which is around sleep and start times. There's a couple of bills in the state legislature that keep coming back to life because there's some strong support from folks who look at the research, and the research is very clear. The research says teens need more sleep. So to a lot of folks, it's an open and closed case of, well, teens need more sleep, therefore we should let them sleep in longer, so let's get that roadblock of the start of school out of the way. So this was a topic that a very strong vocal part of our community brought forward in early 2016, and we kind of looked at it, and it generated some strong polarizing opinions within our own leadership team. Much of our leadership team within the district said, you know what, sounds great, research looks good, but there's some huge problems there. It's going to make transportation too expensive because we would have to realign all of our transportation system. It doesn't really take into account the impact that that's going to have on athletics for kids in sports programs. So it was almost a done conversation from the start. But as we see many times, those folks who are passionate about a topic don't necessarily think that that's the end of the conversation, nor should they. So that conversation continued and kept coming up. And we were looking for a process, a way to really engage the community around what are those other pieces that everybody needs to hear, and what are those pieces that we may never even think of, those margarita thoughts, as Matt put it, that maybe are the best solution that people don't even realize they're looking for just yet. As we got into that process, one of the things that we were blown away with was, first of all, let me say the participation rate. We had more than 7,000 individuals participate with us in this first process, which was more than any non-mandatory survey or input instrument we'd used before. So that is a huge level of participation for us. And even more amazing is just the sheer number of thoughts. So over 15,000 thoughts that people shared, individual thoughts, that not only were shared with us, but were shared with those other 7,000 plus participants, and they got to see many of those thoughts. And importantly, tell us how important those thoughts were to them. So that's that STAR, that ranking process that lets people see other people's thoughts and say, you know what, that does resonate with me. And some of the outcomes from this process especially, that was very impactful for us. We launched with 3 questions, and we use open-ended questions. And one of the great things is with 3 questions and 7,000 participants, if you've run input processes before, you're probably going, oh my gosh, who got to do the analysis and go through all that? Well, the great thing was, it wasn't us. It was Thoughtexchange. And that's important for a couple of reasons. One is certainly, yeah, the workload. The more important reason is it actually provides a level of separation from the system and a level of separation from that analysis and people's assumption that the results are going to be biased on that. As I shared, we already had a leadership team who had pretty strongly expressed, you know what, this is not an idea that's going forward. This is not an idea we really want to engage around. So the ability to have a third party who we set some ground rules at first, and we said, this is, you know, we don't want things that are attacking people. We set what those ground rules are, but then Thoughtexchange actually takes the work of doing the analysis and doing it in that impartial way, which really, I think, helps build the confidence in the process and the conversation that people have. And what that analysis team from Thoughtexchange does is they give you kind of 2 levels of analysis. One is for your leadership team, and that's what you're seeing on your screen right now. This interactive website that really takes those 11,000 plus, 15,000 plus thoughts and says, here's where they really fall into some categories. So here's of the group who really was supporting a change in start time, the group who was really against a change in start time. What does that look like? And importantly, it allows you to dig down even deeper into that. So on this interactive site they gave us, you can click actually one of those bars, and it takes you in to that next level of analysis, which really talks about some of the themes. So amongst that group that's kind of pro-changing start times, really looking for what generates the most traction as far as what supporters of changing start time are looking for. Simply that it allows more sleep, that the research is important. And then going down a level further, you can dig down into each of those category areas and see the actual thoughts that were shared and put into those categories by the Thoughtexchange analysis team. That's important for a couple of reasons. One, it lets you see the specifics of the nuance of the conversation. And 2, it lets you see the actual language people are using in the conversation. And putting my communication hat on for a minute, that's very useful for us because that helps us move out of that education ease and talking about a topic in a conversation and making sure we're using the language that our stakeholders are using so they understand it, they relate to it, and it just makes that conversation that much easier. So being able to see those individual thoughts and the level of traction they generated. So on that first one, you can see 54 stars assigned from 16 people. So we know for those 16 people, that was a very important thing to them. And being able to really look at the relevance and the traction that each thought got, not just what people shared the most, but when they were exposed to another idea, what really resonated with them was important to us. So on this one, I want to talk a little bit about just what we found and what kind of came out of the conversation. When we looked at the conversation, there were kind of three big takeaways for us. One was that the impact of working families resonated across economic lines. And it's a conversation we had internally, but being able to see that not only at our less affluent schools and our more affluent schools was an important issue, it was an important issue all the way across the board. And that was something that was very powerful to us in being able to further the conversation on the topic. The other piece, one of the other pieces that really came out of this conversation that we were able to get out of this, that we missed in our own kind of internal processing and analysis on it, was the big concern that was shared across all of our schools was the impact to family time. Not necessarily the after-school athletics and the after-school clubs, but if our students are staying later at school because they're starting later at school, I'm still going to go to bed as a parent at the same time. So that means I have less time with my kids. And that was something that all of our families really resonated around. The other third thing that it really showed us was that regardless of some concern areas, people really understood and appreciated the science behind it. And they said, you know what, this isn't a horrible idea, but we have some concerns. So then that really pushed our leadership team to think, well, how do we impact with that? How do we move that conversation forward? Our solution was to step into the change a little bit. So instead of moving to 9 or 9:30 as the advocacy group was really asking us to do, we decided instead to move 5 minutes per year for the next 3 years, so a total of a 15-minute shift, and we're moving the entire system. So not only just our secondary schools, but our elementary schools too. That allows us to alleviate that concern around transportation costs because the entire transportation system just moves 5 minutes. That allows us to alleviate some of the change fatigue and fear that our families had around the impact it would have if I have a high schooler and a middle schooler and an elementary kid and being able to get them all to school on time and not have these huge gaps in between when I have to do that. So it was allowing us to step into that. So we're making progress towards the goal that folks see value in, but we're doing it in a way that's thoughtful of the concerns and the issues that people were able to raise and were able to share with each other, which was very important. So the second example I want to take you through real quick is in a conversation that for us really started as about moving our spring break. Our spring break has traditionally been attached to that Easter weekend holiday, either the week before or the week after. And as we were looking at our absence rates for both students and staff and seeing that the further we got into the spring without a break somewhere in there, we were seeing larger and larger absence rates. So the idea was if we move our spring break to be more in the middle of that second semester, we'll see less absences because people won't have that burnout effect. But before you touch the school calendar, that's something you definitely want to get some input around. So we did a thought exchange process. We embedded that question about spring break. We also said, you know what, let's talk about the February break because in our system, we don't give just the President's holidays, the 2 Mondays. We actually give an entire week. You know, it used to be called Ski Week. I don't think folks call it Ski Week as much anymore, but it is another week in there, and we wanted to know, is that important to people? Does that give us some wiggle room to do something with it if we wanted to make a change there? So we ran a thought exchange process. In looking at this, I won't show you the back end of the analysis, but this is the front end analysis. So this is a website that actually shares with your school community, and again, built by Thoughtexchange, which was a great time saver for us. But it shares those thoughts, the results, and again, people can dig in just like you can on that leadership piece that we showed you on the other example. Folks can dig into the thoughts based on district-wide results and their school results. What you're seeing on the screen here is an example of some of the specific thoughts that were shared that really summarized some of the themes we saw. And in looking at this exchange, a majority of folks valued that Easter break. And where we weren't necessarily surprised by that from our families, at least the majority of our families. We were a little surprised by that from our staff, though. We thought our staff would be a little more open to the idea of moving that spring break, being able to have that more even break in between. And they said, no, I kind of like the spring break. I've got it built in. It works for us. we don't really want to touch it. So that was a good informative point for us. And again, something that Thoughtexchange allows us to do, because we have that demographic side of the question and equation as well, looking at what did our parents say, what did our students say, and what did our staff say, and what does that tell us? So in this one, we were able to, again, look at some of those pieces. We left Easter alone where it was. The interesting piece that came out of this, and kind of the margarita idea a little bit, was people were okay with shortening that February break. The catch to it was, that was expressed, you know, if we would ask the survey, do you want to shorten the February break, yes or no, we would have got an answer. But this allowed us to see the nuance in the conversation and see people rally to the idea of shorten that February break, but only if you're going to move the start of the school year back or the end of the school year forward, because we don't want to just move those days and put them somewhere else in the year and keep the same length. We want to start later, or we want to get out earlier. And that's really where we'll support the idea of shortening that February break. So again, being able to take the nuance in that conversation and have people relate to it has been very powerful for us, and we're taking that into consideration as we look at revising our future calendars throughout the school year.
Awesome. Yeah. Sorry, Trent, go ahead.
I was just going to say, you know, hopefully you can see that being able to engage in that process and being able to have people exposed to those thoughts with each other really allowed us to build trust in the conversation and be able to have people buy into the conversation and participate in a way that we hadn't seen before.
Awesome. Yeah, thank you very much. It's great hearing the stories there, and I hope that folks are find those valuable as well. As you know, just as how you're able to take action on the data there. So I'm going to use this one here. Folks that are on, if you want to write this down or even give it a shot right now, load the URL thoughtexchange.com/join, and then it's going to ask you to enter a 9-digit code. And so you can put this 9-digit code into the bar that comes up at thoughtexchange.com/join. And then it'll ask you you can push the button that says join, and it should take you to a screen that will have a big purple button at the bottom that will say participate. And following that, there'll be a little bit of just terms and conditions, one little page for you to navigate through. And then you'll see a question on the screen around school safety. And this is an ongoing exchange. It's one that other people have already participated in. But I wanted to give you this opportunity to go and test drive the Thoughtexchange platform, so you have a sense of how people move through an exchange, how you get a sense of what's being said by others, and just kind of get your hands in it. I know it's always nice to talk about the flashy new car, but it doesn't really mean anything unless you can sit in the driver's seat and drive it around. So this is my hope here is that folks are able to go in and dig in. Again, we can even put this in the chat, but it's thoughtexchange.com/join, and then that 9-digit code there. My email will come up at the end. If there's any questions around this or getting access to it that you need, please feel free to reach out.
Great, thank you. Thank you so much, Matt and Trent. Now we will move to answer attendee questions that have come in during the presentation. Let me just move to that view and see if we have anything. I don't see that we currently have any questions. I'll give people a couple of minutes to enter their questions.
Sure. Yeah, absolutely. I might just summarize with this, if it's okay, Celeste.
Sure.
So, you know, we talked about different forms of communication and the upsides and the challenges that come with them. Of course, there's upsides and challenges that come with Thoughtexchange too. I think Trent spoke really well to all of the positives that are listed here. And Trent, maybe you want to speak to a little bit of this. You know, feel free. The piece we hear and the piece we see a lot is that it requires some vulnerability, the willingness to be open to hearing whatever it is your constituent stakeholders, members of the group want to say. And so that requires a bit. And that vulnerability piece may or may not be a part of your organizational culture. So sometimes that requires change. The other piece around equitable access, I think I see a language question coming in there, and we can address it in a second. Yeah, there is a bit of language challenges, and we're continuing to work through it. However, you know, that evolution is building and building, and we know that technology doesn't solve everything. So it's being able to use the data to inform conversations. So anyways, I'll just leave that there. I see a question here, Celise, that says, how do you reach our EL community? And so the platform itself, I'm not sure if you noticed in the slides before, results were in Spanish and in English. And so we can build the exchange currently today. Any exchange that's run publicly can be run simultaneously in Spanish and English. And the thoughts that are shared in whichever language are actually translated using software in the STAR steps, so that, you know, if I'm an English speaker, I can see a Spanish thought was submitted, it's translated into English, and then I'll star it. So it helps to bridge communities that way through language. In the near future, we'll be able to do that in SMS across any language that's translatable in software, which means that a Hindi speaker can interact with a Vietnamese speaker, who can interact with an English speaker and a Spanish speaker. And we'll be able to do that via the SMS platform.
You know, Matt, the other piece I'll throw in on that question, because we've worked with it as well, we have a number of language groups in the district. And what we've been able to do with some of our language groups that it's a little harder to do the translation for is actually run a paper-based process or an in-person-based process that mirrors the Thoughtexchange process in the questions we're asking, the ability for folks to weigh in and kind of rank ideas that are shared by other people, and then being able to try and integrate that back into the Thoughtexchange pool of ideas that get shared out with others. There are definitely some limitations to that in what you can share and how easily it is to share that back and forth between the language groups, but it is one way we've been able to engage in a broader way beyond what the software has been able to do so far, in making sure that those voices are still part of the conversation as well.
Okay, wonderful. Well, AXA thanks you for joining K-12, Thoughtexchange, Matt, and Trent for today's free webinar. We'll be following up by email with a recording of today's presentation, and if you would like to learn more about Thoughtexchange, you can find their logo on AXA's Partner for Purpose page, which I can plug into chat. To keep aware of upcoming free webinars, see the AXA calendar on the AXA homepage, and thank you all again for joining, and have a great day.